My reading tonight is dedicated to your rivers, which I've been reading a little bit about. Thanks to some materials that David Elliott was kind enough to have sent to me. I read the Lackawanna River Currents recently, and it reminded me that your rivers drain into the Chesapeake Bay, which is a place I know from many journeys with my parents to the bird sanctuaries of Chincoteague Island. And I thought to recognize the linkages and pathways that rivers especially school us in, I would first read a poem from my new manuscript of poetry, a book called The Idea of Home. This poem is about my own process of flowing toward the Chesapeake Bay, toward my waiting family, and above all, the process of accepting the mingled inheritances of our American culture and past. It's called Directions Home. Take the Beltway out of the capital. Pick up Highway 50 east into Tidewater, where two black men sheave corn, one holding, one wrapping. It is a good American road. Steel green signs to the chop tank, the wide shining bay of watery fingers that pry the land. Dedicated flatbeds haul one segment of sewer pipe from dawn to dusk, and a pickup with handsome hay bales baffles, loose ends excited in the wind. Raw materials make me happy. The way a field of melons gives me the wish to kiss someone. And as I was not deprived in school of films featuring aluminum in vats, derricks plunging into the outer crust, each ending swollen with music and wheat, I rejoice at the Pocomoke City lumber truck with 12 cork logs bolted in place. Doors swing on piano hinges, valves open a sluice, all boats rise. On the other hand, and this could be another scene from another movie, I cannot make these cargoes come home, nor have the drivers dismount in paneled garages, lingering one boot on the chassis, then jumping into someone's arms to a beer and something from the same big bowl. I'll tell about the same big bowl the way that Musa, the cab driver, told me, in his voice that rattles like sea beans shaken by ceremony and wind. He told me about the old of Africa, beginning with American nursing homes. Musa says, "There is a building for old people here. At night they sit with no company. Please, let me give you an example. In my country, we work 4 hours and then we fish. Here, you must be productive always. But when you are old, you can produce nothing. Please, let me give you an example. Before me, there are my mother and father, the two of them. They are before me, so they can talk to me and I do not talk. When I am home, I am with my father and mother, and we eat from the same big bowl." Here, Musa scooped air with one hand loosed from the wheel. "And if my wife and I have troubles, we go to the old people. We go to my Uncle Musa, and this is the way the old people produce." I'm driving home on the good asphalt road. US 50 twitches past some pumpkins stacked on picturesque wooden carts. Please, let me give you an example. There was an uncle who said nigger. There was a father who made nuclear waste. There was a mother who wondered whether Athena did right, casting her vote against the Furies. In the driveway, oyster shells crackle under my wheels. We decide to eat crabs, shaping the backfin meat into cakes, cooking them golden, laying them on a plate circled with lemons, tomatoes, and greens. Someone says, the waste can be stored in the sea. I didn't speak, and I didn't leave. There were colors, the colors of wedges and peels, and the table was groaning with shadows like paintings of game, limp next to pots of blooms. And I couldn't speak, and I couldn't leave, and so I kissed them, my mother and father. The two of them, they are before me. Since we are, welcome, since we are well into the election year, I thought I would read my only overtly political poem, which is a kind of meditation vaguely directed toward the president, and it's called, "This is the Way I Do It." In an election year, I favor this for a summertime activity. Go stand at your own screen door in the migrant oaky apron way during midday sun or near dusk when satellites show up in the sky. Your eyes swim in and out of focus so the dizzy grid interchanges with leaves, lawns, the concrete walk, what have you. Like a fine mesh of reason it is. A maple is 20 grids wide, though hazy, and if you back up, maybe 30. Nothing surreal flies in American air. The fringed old leaves just wave, like our idea of girls, in lotus-eater air so sleepy all the houses are going to sleep, like a child's book closing fat golden pages on vanilla cupcakes. Everyone knows staring out the porch when bowls of new potatoes are on the table is true grit. So this is the way I do it. Mr. President, I say, wiping my hands on the apron, which is yellow with flowers, the enemy lives here, so far as I can see. And by this time, he is looking at it too, soft-focused and bright beyond the pine and the yard, which eventually curves into the shape seen by the astronauts, some of them forever changed. For the past 6 years of my life as a poet, I have often been involved in other places, in immersing myself in other far-flung landscapes, the northern reaches of the Scottish islands, parts of Greece, Belize, and Central America. And I've always traveled to pose a single question: what is right habitation? And to listen for such answers as each place has to give. I'd like to read you a paragraph from an essay on Greece that appears in the book of travel essays. Here I am on the island of Lesbos, near Turkey, with Peter. And this paragraph follows a section on the herbal remedies that are available on the island of Lesbos. I thought this paragraph might suggest some of my sense of what poetry is and what it might be doing. The little section is called Poems in Situ. Like plants, poems grow from particular habitats and have healing properties. And for a long while, I have nursed the notion that poems are somewhat analogous to the organic simples and compounds made from plants. How pleased I was when reading one day in the taverna to come upon the following passage from the open book of Odysseus Elytis, who is, I'm sure you know, one of the great poets of Greece. He says, "Primitive peoples, poets before the age of poems, overcame evil by reciting frightful and incomprehensible words. In the same fashion, until a few years ago, our island nurses, with utter seriousness, chased evil spirits from above our cradles by uttering words without meaning, holding a tiny leaf of a modest herb which received God knows what strange powers exclusively from the innocence of its own nature. Poetry is precisely this tiny leaf with the unknown powers of innocence and the strange words which accompany it." Close quote. Lesbos, as everyone knows, is the soil of the poet Sappho, Sappho in the Greek pronunciation. Less well known is this contemporary master who also traces his heritage to this coastline. A few miles to the west of Skalaski Minas, where we are, on an unmarked country road, stands the Elapoutelis family home. Both the mother and father of Odysseus Elytis, born Elapoutelis, were from old families of Lesbos, and it was boyhood summers on Aegean islands that saturated this poet's language in luminous light. Elytis writes a poetry that comes, as he says, from an alphabet of the Aegean, the garden of the sea, olive trees, above all the light, transmuted into a human script. Often described as surreal, in situ, the poems prove to be a clear portrait of reality. About these matters, Elytis has said that he and his generation, quote, "have attempted to find the true face of Greece. This was necessary because until then, the true face of Greece was presented as Europeans saw Greece. We had to destroy the tradition of rationalism which lay heavily on the Western world. Many facets of surrealism I cannot accept," he says, "but after all, it was the only school of poetry which aimed at spiritual health. It had cleared the ground in front of us, enabling us to link ourselves physiologically with our soil." Close quote. To be linked physiologically with one's soil. This must also be what Conrad Aiken means when he says that the landscape and the language are the same, and we ourselves are language and are the land. So I thought I would read you a few poems that reflect on the resilient, somewhat brutalized, enduringly beautiful landscape of my childhood in the South. I grew up in the Tennessee mountains where nuclear weapons plants had been built in the late 40s. And of these poems, the critic Bonnie Costello recently told me that she thought they lyricized technology without condoning it. And I like that. Slippery Elm. When slippery elms in summer leaf plunge, as later maples draining sugar will plunge honest rhapsodics into a spate of talk, sap turns to wine, and the plein air to a thronged cafe where everyone gestures except one languid beauty. Sun renders each blade a raconteur, each leaf in the tossing branches a tongue, a provocative one, to cull replies about the coming event of night. Burning bushes are natural phenomena. Roses of Sharon in fence rows, fox grapes and swollen concords, privet hedges in boxcar trim, clapboards, bless them, horizontal if not plumb, and man-made signs dazzled on the pavement. One says, "Let's go bowling." Let us bowl then, you and I, by the lambent fast food emblems. Under the tossing alley trees, we can cheer the moon, sliced pale. She climbs through a joinery of limber straws. Candle power. When a dealership opened, grand, or carnival came into lots outside town, not far from the dump, we children, thin and growing up southern godly, were taken to the big deal by searchlight. The lamps, loose scissors, large as tools of the weird sewing sisters, their candle power good to 40 miles in fog from the insolvent river. The scissors of light searched our skies and trees, and on the rise the transformers and towers that rung the Tennessee Valley. The long beams of light flushed the faces of newel posts in town, briefly ripe to the color of pumpkins. They betrayed themselves at last to be drawn on flatbed trucks, kettle drum lights bolted to a rig. But I loved a cheap stunt, and when we rode through the night, the lamps that called us to Chevrolets confirmed in my ignorant heart that somewhere heaven was searched by a mother ship with a round and radiant technology. We can always hope. Valuable timber. The walk in the garden was meant to be a balm, but there was a hemlock complex with sun, 3 greens, apple, olive, hunter, none of them true. Stumbling on the scene, you don't invent. Thus, as fancy turns in amusement parks to animated figures, Goofy, Goldilocks, at filling stations we're talking grease, just kids plunging to our shoulder blades in ice and groping submerged shapes in the cooler for one skinny, starry-necked, knee-high crush. Just so, the view from a plane is all pattern, cloverleaf, light bulb, lollipop drives that pop like luck, wit, or sweetness from the puzzled ground. So it is that a valuable timber tree bearing cones and needle leaves sways one. It's a beauty, with shrew brown bark like shards over a skin that holds the cambium layer, sapwood and heartwood, mainly for strength. Down the nimble branches slope and splay. Needles bristle on the stubby twigs. The effect is that of green and curious hands, reaching almost to the ground, tempted perennially as bees to sumptuous stamens. Touch, feel, set it down nodding, pollen-laden. The last one I want to read in this little cluster is a poem called Likewise. I think really this isn't so much about lyricizing technology. that creeps in. But this was an argument with the way that the word like has insinuated itself into our public way of talking, so that some people find it they're themselves unable to get through a sentence without using it. And I have a lot of theories about it that have become more compassionate since I wrote this, but this was, I guess, an exorcism to try to discourage its use. And I suppose, too, this was a poem by a poet scrutinizing the whole practice of simile and the degree to which this is a dangerous activity. Likewise, the pond is like a mackerel skin tonight, the mackerel like a beaded evening bag. This is like that is like this. Oh, let's call the whole thing off and take it straight. Nothing is like anything else. Even the parrot and the apish ape mirror, mimic, and do like unmatched. To begin, algae, abalone, alewife, each the spitting image of itself. Likewise, beetles, potato, scarab, and whirligig. Nothing even comes close to beryl cactus. Nothing is more original than a bog, more rare than the cougar and crane, save all the above named. I've never seen anything like it. Dust bowls, deer, the descent of man and estuaries, flakes of snow, no two like, fire, flax, gannets, and gulls. Honeybees and the Hoover Dam are unique. There is nothing like a dam. Ditto inbreeding, ice ages, industrialization, Joshua trees, lagoons, and the law that to liken a lichen is tautological. Indeed, the rule of diminishing simile holds that all of these are idiosyncrasies, the leekies, legumes, maize, marsupials, and moose. Virtually nothing is extraneous here, not orchids, ooze, pampas, nor peat. This is the world of plenitude and power, every bit of it out of this world. The rain and rattlers, sperm, swamps, and swans, as now we inch toward an end, vectors and a winter that figures to be like no other. Say the selfsame earth is to your liking, and let us continue yeast, yuccas, zoans, all things like beyond compare. I think in the little section I read you about Elitis, that he and Conrad Aiken are suggesting something of what it is that our languages have to do with creating a right habitation, an enduring home in the planet. Is it that our dwelling is so powerfully mediated through language? It seems that how we talk about the earth deeply affects what we do within its compass and what sorts of policies we are even able to conceive. For example, it's one thing to name our world a natural resource base, which seems to be the language of prudent management, tinged by industrial experience. It's quite another thing to speak of a planet-scale being called Gaia. They're not mutually exclusive, but they're very different conceptions. Secondly, it would seem that some of our language, including perhaps the kinds we call poetry, has the power to quicken consciousness into being fully present and fully alive. This heightened, naturally erotic acuity and delight in an interplay with the world is, I think, the real wealth of existence. Unlike other kinds of wealth, it is free and abundant everyone who has eyes to see, ears to hear, fingers to touch can participate in that wealth. And once a person begins to have that sensation of authentic wealth, I think they are much less vulnerable to being preyed on by the very debased idea that wealth is having more and more and more things, which is, of course, such a destructive to our planet concept. It seems that when people do begin to have this sensation of authentic wealth, there really is no going back. One of the influences in my thinking on this subject has come from the poetry of a 16th century Indian poet princess named, someone here may be able to help me with the pronunciation. Is it Mirabai or Mirabai? Well, we won't know. Mirabai? Thank you. I thought I'd read you one of her poems, which I think beautifully expresses this. And it's called Why Mira Can't Go Back to Her Old House. The colors of the dark one have penetrated Mira's body, all the other colors washed out. Making love with the dark one and eating little, those are my pearls and my carnelians. Meditation beads and the forehead streak, those are my scarves and my rings. That's enough feminine wiles for me. My teacher taught me this. Approve me or disapprove me. I praise the mountain energy night and day. I take the path that ecstatic human beings have taken for centuries. I don't steal money. I don't hit anyone. What will you charge me with? I have felt the swaying of the elephant's shoulders. And now you want me to climb on a jackass? Try to be serious. I think those last two lines are just about the best lines ever written. So I won't say much more about the rest of these poems. I hope that what I've said here will give these, will allow these to cohere in some way, and at least suggest to you what I imagine they're involved with. This is a poem, a very old poem of mine. It's called This Is Something Simple. And I guess you would say this was a philosophical poem, one of those attempts that a young mind is making to figure things out. This is something simple. Tangerine peels shredded on the counter like rocking saucers with butter-white insides and bits of string. But for some peculiar reason, the skins remind me of Handel speaking of his Messiah. I did think I did see all heaven before me. These peels are the shavings of heaven, certainly not the orchard agape with music of spherical fruits, but still real relics, fragrant and recently of the garden. I stare at them hard, up close, as though my eye were to a keyhole. What could Handel have seen? Perhaps what Dante saw in the blinding vision of paradise, light unfolding unto light, and the 1 millisecond, as we might say, of pure illumination. Or perhaps something vast and geographical like the landscapes of Frederick Church, a spectacle of chasms and plateaus and always a river, a shining serpentine leading to, my God, even the needles on the promontory pines are absolutely realistic, with flecks of sunset on each tip. You have to admit, there is something appealing about a gigantic vision. But sooner or later, the visions all go to something so brilliant it can't be described, save as blinding light in hyperbole after hyperbole, with cymbals, shrieks, and releases of doves. And another thing, after the levens of truth, mystery remains, much the same as the anecdote of the trolley and the village clock, supposed to explain relativity, but itself so mysterious as to require explanation. Myself, I look at these peels and work from there. Say these fruits and the television, the Rockies, Hiroshima and Easter eggs and Orion, and Peter finding arrowheads at the lake, whooping at the luck of each sharp blue edge, which he could hold in his hand easily as lunch money. Say all of it could be connected by me or a greater mind. There, you'd have it. These are pleasing skins. What nice ruddy color. Now they'll go in the compost, then to the garden, and tomatoes will grow next year if the spring isn't wet. Now, doesn't that clear things up? I was talking to David Elliott before the reading about the haiku poetry that he writes and how much I admire that ability to embody that attention to essence. And I just have to apologize. Every one of my poems is just the opposite. It just goes on and on. But in the new book that I hope will be published over the next year, The Idea of Home, I think I may have learned something about compression. This is the only poem I've ever written that was based on a dream in any way. And I don't really know if this is what was in the dream, but I just remember that 3 characters came to me and they said, "We want the old story." And it was a charge to me to get on with the old stories. And it was very clear, of course, in the dream what that was and exactly what I was supposed to do, and you know the rest of the story. The old story, I woke up and of course couldn't remember what it was. So this is an attempt to try to create it with my conscious, with my waking mind. The old story. The wish that every touched thing turn gold is chaos in morning light. Logic hunkers and plain words mean nothing over toast. What can be recalled? Straw to silk, gilded birds, a forest with snow and more snow falling, and morning is gone. The youngest prince, lacking title, forsakes the palace and soon is lost in a wood. And the princess, who speaks to frogs, strays from insufferable suitors, the embroidery. Their minds are a thicket wood, patches of light in gorgeous fretwork, given to pity for the siblings who jostle in coaches to their coronations, who wander swell in lugubrious forests. Everyone can be in the story, the elected, the popular, and well-to-do. And it may happen in a grocery store. every shopper with bird's eye peas, a princess with a pocket full of magic, loose in a world that quavers with ash, and a grace not much involved with merit. Soon comes an encounter with something like death, and the character changes to stone. But at last, we hear no more of unearthly beauty. The acrid stone assumes a mortal shape, and laundry whirls like seasons, as now, every day, gray as bankers or blue as jazz, we kiss our collection of toads. Does anyone have a request from this book? I know you know.
Nothing.
Would you like to hear? That's a very long poem. I could divide it into 20 parts, like Archie Ammons is doing with his new poems. It'd be 20 little haikus. This poem is an argument with Beckett that I had one morning after reading a review of one of his theater pieces. I guess I end up agreeing with him by the end of the poem, so. On nothing. The problem is the dissection problem. Let me have at that frog. One lays open a tiny heart and slimy little lungs and is sickened by bullfrogs mottled in pond water, mating forever. Is it too much or too little love for the world that moves one to despair in this life about the despair of nothing after life, which this life briefly, badly interrupts? It is true, nothing is unfamiliar to us, accustomed as we are to linoleum, wool snoods, hands in pockets feeling the working hip bone. But nothing is not despair, nor dark, nor pain. It is none of these, and that is the point. So if driven by fear of nothing, despair is a simple mistake, a bit of a joke. And what a waste of the gaping something to think that because it is over soon, it is a groaning effort to haul the sun each morning, to scurry around a pyramid of footstools, improbable beings, frantic as mimes to prop up marvels that wobble toward drains or manholes. And two, it's unclear that eternity has claim to meaning, or that if we had longer, forever, say, we could do better than we do at 5 in a wagon, at 80 brushing the hair from the forehead of a new youth. Eternity seems an unlikely place to look for more. Those twin prongs of before and after seem merely to hold the middle ground like skewers on summer corn, so we may bring it tidily to our lips. In fact, we don't know that there is nothing. All that we are and all that we aren't, it's not that. The process of oceans grinding shells to sand and sucking it back for bottom dwellers, it's not even that. Zero is our invention, an idea for which there is no evidence. The great metaphor of empty space is false, full of red suns rising in every direction. A vacuum is light. A leg severed is memory. A child unborn is regret or relief. An accident avoided is a picnic by the road with Dairy Queen burgers in thin tissue wrappings smelling of salt and blissful Greece. Except that we think of it, and on occasion, groping for a nameless quarter, will feel the pull of a thing beyond reckoning. But to think of it, even to name it nameless, means that is not what we face. Either our minds are famously unreliable, and we should get on with folding napkins and sheets steaming from the iron, or our thoughts are not aliens, rather emitted from nature like shad roe, oxides, uranium, and beryls. If so, these conceptual visions of nothing, at which we excel, are pictures of home, to be admired more stringently. Maybe I'll read you some poems from the new book, if that's all right. My mother said this book wasn't as joyful as the last book, and that I think that's probably true. But actually, I think I have picked for you some poems that are among the more that are poems of praise. On the whole, I would say it's a dark book, but this is a fun poem. I think it's called That High Girl's Song, and this is a memory. It comes to me at a difficult time in my life. When Ellen Jane Warren and I sashayed through McCrory's 5 and 10, we passed the tuna specials on white, past ladies with hennas, hair nets, blue smocks. We loved their huge red lips. And on we went past nylons, decals, guns, and holsters, and the Maybelline counter as unknown as the classic Maya glyphs of sacrifice. We were bent on a place far back in the store where fish were gliding in tropical forests, violet, cobalt, silver, every color under fluorescence. Beyond the swooning tanks was a private door, like an escape door, we said, out of town, like going into the lighted tanks to a scene where bridges and waving foliage were clear. In winter now, dark comes on so soon. Envelopes are sealed and the process is in motion. From a rafter where the eagle-eyed soul sits, I watch this body leave through the door of the house it built in foolish love. Solace comes rolling, rolling the surfaces of years. Like an ocean it comes, coming the miles to a beach that breaks with whitecaps, with the pounding deep sound of being socked in the stomach, and a whoosh up the tilted sand to the clack of gulls and radios, as under the boardwalk, a glittering sand crab feels the first girl fingers of its life scream that high girl song of pleasure. This poem was written, I guess, it's called Midsummer Solstice. But I'm not sure that's right. This poem was written on the equinox. That's not the same as the solstice, is it? So its title is completely wrong. But I'll have to rename it. Morning glories have outgrown a plain cotton string harp, stretched with them in mind in May. Green around as garden snakes, tendrils nose the air, unfazed by emptiness, by sky blue being the scattering of light on dust. By these longing vines, by purple-topped turnips pressing from earth, by dill going to seed and birdhouse gourds swelling into infancy, a spider's silent advent has been coaxed. Who can say when this shaggy holiness arrived to sun in meditation on the wall, or when, in the western sky near dusk, a conjunction sudden came to pass? Bright Venus, her dancing war hero Mars, and Jupiter, ponderous, swinging below sweet chariot and plumb-line clock. Benign as transcendence, the longest light elides behind houses where nature exalts and cries, as in the Aegean children leap fires a sliver away from Byzantium. For fun, they believe. A mother will say, for fertility. Truly, the longest day of the year makes love with the multiple limbs of insects and nomadic planets, with a slippery elm, unaware of its beauty, its uncountable leaves dappling dark into a concentrate of all color. Just so, the winter, coming closer, will husband all the colors in lightless worlds. Extreme spun globe, this is your eve of being. O night of equilibrium, nothing is young, nothing is old, nothing becomes, nothing withers. Hear the panting of soft-bellied frogs. I think the last poem I'll read for you suggests a little bit the direction that I'd like to be going with my next poems. I've noticed that in these poems, suddenly there's a lot of light and there are a lot of wings. All kinds of winged creatures are arriving, and I really just don't know what to make of that. But I have a feeling that this poem, which is called Glant, is one of those instruction poems that comes to poets. I'm sure you all have had this experience. Your poems know, well, I don't mean to be presumptuous. In my case, my poems know well before I do what is going on, and I just have to read them later. Sometimes it will be a year later before I understand that they have been announcing the arrival of something. I think this may be an instruction poem about being lighter. The handsomest drawer in my house holds damasks from a world but briefly seen, a fold of wedding clothes, and applique quilt worn thin and passed in time from hand to hand. Countering physics, the cloths gain weight with decay. Even silk from a delicate worm has weight, pre-existent and pressing for earthly form, prodigiously as eggs who signal the traveling sperm with scents. Elsewhere, a hum from the original bang comes into English, hushed and excited as swooping wings. Some bird flown onto the subway platform, a raptor with a salient wingspan, rising, then fugitive, before the commuters question their eyes, before the bums can say delirium tremens. Between weight and wings is something simple, promising not joy, but reverence, a glissade over the saved glass jar of roses, the wild blooms drooping, drying, bowed, completely sad and accomplished. It comes to a glance, the long arc of an amaryllis leaf, the tip caught by morning sun, bright as a green buoy. You could not press that leaf into success, or fame, or an obituary notice. Yet it suffices, I confess, and stays my heart with its call to light perfection, existing as though the eons had not prepared the way. The smooth taper of it, the live geometry. For such as these, an encomium is a gilded betrayal. Leave it then as a leaf, spilling from a pot, posing with its beauty, its lavender shadow and stained glass green, the question of light. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really just wanted to thank David again and the members of the committee for inviting me. It's just a real treat for Peter and me to be here, and we're looking forward to driving around your area tomorrow and looking at culm piles. Culms. Is that a Welsh word? Does anyone know? And if anyone had any suggestions for us as where to go find them or what else to look for, we'd appreciate it.